Are you struggling to find out who you really are? Like maybe life is just really confusing. There are demands on you from all these different people, and you can't do the one thing that you really want to do, which is just play video games all day. Well, you're in
Is
luck.
that too much to ask?
Yeah, you're in luck because today's episode, we're going to talk about the
Uh,
importance of being yourself. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
what's up, Randy?
Danny, what does this mean
Yeah.
to you, the importance of being yourself?
It's funny that it's a funny thing to think about, isn't it? Like that we have to think about being ourselves. Like there's so much pressure and there's so much pulling us in different directions that, we feel like ourselves, but we might not actually be ourselves. That's the weird conundrum of being a person. And I mean, this might come from philosophy too, but I think it's very important, like the most important thing, because you can't have a good life, you can't live a quality life that you really want unless you're willing to be yourself, which means make your own decisions, have your own values, and be able to resist the pressures, temptations, expectations, and everything else around you that's trying to tell you to do things a certain way. And it's hard. It's really hard because all of us are susceptible to it, you know?
Mm.
It's
Yeah,
it's a
because
challenge.
there's a nonstop pressure from everywhere to be something other than what you are.
Oh yeah. I mean, dude, I mean, just everybody can resonate with like, when they were in college trying to pick a major. How many people had freaking insight and opinions and expectations about what you should do? And then if you don't pick what they want, they're like, oh, like you did something wrong. And
Yeah.
it's like,
And then God forbid you didn't pick what they wanted and now you're unemployed. They're like, told you so.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
If
they
you
remind you
listen
of
to
it
me.
constantly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And
That's
it's
the
funny because I think that's like it is hard. We struggle with this all the time. I think it's hard to know like how to act, how to conduct yourself, what to do, and even who you are. We're not even really taught how to figure that out. So I think a lot of people do struggle with this.
yeah. I was reading this past week and I came across a Dr. Seuss quote that really hit me. And so I've just been repeating it to myself over the past week. It's be who you are and feel how you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind.
I like that. That's a good
Yeah,
one.
right. And we all learn this stuff as children, and then we forget it as we get older. Because it's like, no, I need to be someone different. I need to feel what's appropriate in society, and because we think that
Yeah.
everybody who doesn't matter is important. But really, like when I was reading that quote, I was thinking about you because I was like, I could pretty much do anything, like be and feel anyway, and you would just accept me how I am. And that just made me feel
Yeah.
nice, warm, and fuzzy on the inside.
Well, yeah, why wouldn't we? I mean, that's the whole point though. Like if somebody's really your friend or really, somebody you're, whatever, friends with or in love with, whatever, like they should just accept you. It shouldn't be like, nonsense. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully they tell you when you're doing something really stupid or like offer good advice, but like besides that, not
Mm-hmm.
pressure. But that's the funny thing. Like how many people I know so many people growing up and stuff and still now who like have friends and there's like expectations to act a certain way because your friends like, even like that kind of click stuff that makes you not yourself. And now it's probably even harder with social media and everything. I'm sure people even struggle more because they're thinking about how they're presenting themselves to others rather than who they are.
Yeah. I just had a very, very interesting situation recently where I met
Oh yeah.
somebody who basically has the ideal life that everybody wants. They're big on social media, very wealthy, all this stuff. And they're absolutely miserable.
Yep.
And it was such an eye opener because I have so many references of people who have accomplished what society says is the ultimate life, and they're
Yeah.
all depressed, all
Well,
miserable.
but this is the funny thing. It's like we tell everybody from day one, we're like, you got to make lots of money, got to work really hard, got to do this, you got to go in this area, that area, whatever. And like we pump up all these things like fame and recognition as being really important, but we don't teach anybody like to think about what they really want, to envision a life that would actually make them happy. And for some people, yeah, maybe being famous would make you happy, but for a lot of people, that kind of attention's not going to help. And that kind of being on all the time is going to suck because you have to act. You're constantly putting on an act.
And
Like,
plus, like they feel like they have to live a perfect life. They
yeah,
they get they get trapped where like when stuff doesn't when life happens, they feel trapped because all of a sudden their life's not perfect. And what are they going
Well,
to
and if
do?
they and then they're scared of, accidentally saying or doing something that somebody perceives a certain way, and then that gets blown out of proportion. You can, I mean, especially when it's like, dude, if it's like an influence or something, their whole thing's built on themselves. You can lose it all very easily. It's crazy. It is. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny because people always like idolize, like we've talked about this before, like Musk and Bezos, and like I thought, like I wouldn't want to be them. Like, yeah, they have lots of shit and money, but like none of their life is like appealing to me. And I think knowing that is super important because like you have to know what you want. Yeah,
Yeah. You know what's really
ridiculous.
interesting is like so like after reading some books on like minimalism and essentialism and stuff like that and getting rid of all the stuff that isn't very meaningful to me, now half the time when I make a purchase, I feel terrible because it's like it didn't live up
Yeah.
to my expectations. And yeah.
I find, it's funny. I find myself doing that a lot where like, because I have very little stuff, like, because I don't need most stuff. But like when I do get something new, like I research it a lot and stuff because I'm like always worried that like I'm gonna get it and be like, this is not what I thought it was gonna be. And then I get mad at it. Because then you have this
Mhm.
extra thing lying around that you don't need and it's annoying.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough.
So the other thing
Uh,
about the importance of being yourself is like I forget exactly what it was, but I was reading in the book, Super Better, about gamifying your life. And it talked about it talked about like psychological fitness. So
who's
like
that by again? Is that by that woman?
McGonagall,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. I listened. I remember because I heard about her on a show. She was talking about the same thing, gamifying your life and stuff. She's
yeah,
interesting.
I mean, very interesting book. It's quite a long book. So if you don't want a long book, just watch the TED Talk. But it is very interesting because there's like
Bullet points.
hundreds of different ways to gamify your life. But she talked about psychological fitness, and like it's really interesting that half of the things she was talking about there with psychological fitness were just being okay with however your life is. It
Yeah.
was just like, it's okay to have negative thoughts sometimes. It's okay to feel depressed and anxious sometimes. And it's just like, this is so anti what is like publicized and
Yeah.
it's public. They're all like, if you feel depressed and something's wrong with you, you better get your life back together and be happy all the time.
Yeah. And it's funny. That's like, that was one of the things that helped me the most. Like when I was actually really down, was just like realizing that it's okay to feel bad sometimes. Like we get it so caught up our head that like if you feel bad, something's wrong with you and you're failing. And it's like such an idiotic way to think because like you can't feel great all the time. There's gonna be good days and bad days. And even if you feel really good all the time, there's gonna be a variation in how you feel. I mean, you're not gonna feel like the same level all the time. There's gonna be peaks and valleys no matter what. And so like just reminding yourself that it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
On
Yeah.
that note of being yourself, though, I do like the existentialists have a nice way of saying it. It's also from the Bible. But like, the way they phrase it is basically like, if we don't like know what really we value, what really matters to us, one, our choices are devalued then because we're not making choices for ourselves. We're making choices really based on others or external factors rather than our own, values, wants, whatever it is. And if we don't choose what aligns with ourselves, we lose ourselves, right? Like if you think of it this way, you only have one chance on this world to live, as far as we know, everything else aside, right? So you have one chance to do things, and you have time, a fair amount of time, yes, but if you only choose what other people expect you to choose, what norms tell you to do, what society tells you to do, you've never actually lived your own life. And if you really think about that, I think it's a very scary, but also important thing to reflect on. Because, like, are you really living your own life? This is your one chance. Are you really doing what you want to do? And, like, yeah, the nice thing about that, too, I think that helps me with it when I think about that is like, even if I might not have been doing that the first, say, 20, 30 years of my life, at least I'm doing it now, right? At least I started to do it. And for most of us, the first, like, 20 years of our lives, we're just coming into our own. We're just starting to think for ourselves. So most of us, yes, a good proportion of the beginning of our lives, we're going to be living somebody else's life. But once you realize it, you can start living your own for real. And then it gets infinitely valuable.
Yeah. Like what's the point of gaining the whole world if you lose your soul in pursuit of it?
Yeah, that's
It's
it. That's the
it's a
quote from the Bible, though. But yeah,
it's a really interesting notion because I've been thinking about that a whole bunch. Because like this whole concept of financial success and
Oh, you
security.
can win the whole world and lose yourself. That, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how Kierkegaard phrases it. But right,
Yeah.
because like you could, yeah, if you follow all the rules, you could like, you could be like financially successful, but miserable because you're not even who you are. You're not even doing who's aligned with you.
Dude, and on a daily basis, I am torn with this thing because it's like, on the one hand, there's the financial wanting more, like wanting the whole world. But then on the other hand, it's like my life right now is pretty close to everything I've always wanted. Like
Yeah.
having more might be nice, but like it's pretty freaking awesome. So like I'm almost losing in the concept of like what's the point of losing yourself? Like this is what I've always wanted. I'm almost losing that because I'm so focused on this more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, that happens to a lot of people. I'm sure they get to where they want to be, but they can't even enjoy it because they're so focused on gaining more. And I think that's the funny thing. Like, we're taught we should just pursue more. And like the idea of having the most, like one, you can't because there's always going to be somebody else pursuing. I mean, like even if you get there, somebody else is going to surpass you. Um, but at a certain point, it's like, well, when is it enough too? Like, that's why I think people should really ask themselves, like, what do I really want or need? It's fine to want more. I mean, I think most people, like, even if we're in a good place, pursuing a little more is not a bad thing. You're keeping yourself safe, you're protecting your interests, whatever. But at what point is the scale kind of balanced the wrong way? Because that pursuit of more is either ruining your life, it's not what you want, it's taking you in a wrong direction, what have you?
Yeah. There was this quote by Henry Ford. I forget what it is. I was trying to look it up, but I can't find it right now. But
Well, let
basically,
me let me jump in with this thing real quick. Hold on.
yeah,
When we read Start from Zero, there was a great story in there. One of the ones I really liked because he was giving examples of people who went through the program and all. And one was this guy that was like 20 something, but he was making about like I think 250 to 300 a year, like good money, definitely good money. But he's like his thing was he's like, yeah, I can make this and I only work like 15 hours a week. He's like, I could definitely make more. He's like, than that. He's like, but I don't need it. Like, why? He's like, this is perfect. It's easy to maintain. I don't have to work a lot and I get to do the things I want to do. And it's like, I think that's what people forget. Like the
yeah,
work is supposed to facilitate living our lives, not the other way around.
yeah. And that, I mean, that's a good example. But I think also people could be doing it earning a lot less than that,
Oh
40,000,
yeah.
50,000,
Yeah,
something like that, and having
absolutely.
enough because it depends where you live and what you do.
And
Because
what you
spending
want.
money, yeah, exactly.
He was traveling a lot, doing all these things. So yeah, I get that, but like a lot of cost with that too. He's probably
Yeah,
spending a lot of money going
yeah.
around. But like if you're,
That's another
you know,
thing, dude. That's another thing. I got trapped in that, the whole like what's it
travel the
called?
world thing.
Travel the what I forget, digital
Oh,
nomad.
nomadic.
I got
Oh yeah,
trapped in
yeah,
the
yeah.
digital nomad craze for a while. This whole like, oh, travel the world, go to all these different places every few weeks. You could go somewhere different. You could see every, and I did
It
it.
sounds nice. It's
Exhausting,
tiring.
exhausting. It
It's
was like
tiring.
I could not, after doing that for a couple of years, I could not wait to find somewhere and never travel again. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's one of those things where you have to experience, and some people probably love it and they love doing it all the time. But
Well,
it's
it's.
just
Oh, sorry.
don't let society's like this is the better life if you travel all over the place. Don't let society put that on you because if that's not you, that wasn't me, and if
Yeah.
that's not you, it's just not going to fit.
No, it won't. It's funny. It's like, yeah. I mean, it's just about knowing yourself. It's funny how hard it is, and how little we actually think about ourselves and who we are, like for real on a regular basis. Like I remember like I used to go out a ton when I was younger and like it wasn't until I got older that I realized like I don't even really like going out that much. Like I like to once in a while, like I like seeing friends and stuff, but I do not like going to crowded places all the time. I just don't care that much. It's more like annoying to me than it is fun. And like once I realized I just stopped, it's better. Or like traveling. I like traveling. I think it's a good idea to see other places. You learn a lot, you get new perspective. I could never do it just constantly. Because there's a lot about it that's also annoying. The flights, the customs, all the BS with paperwork and stuff. You know, it's you also have that like, being, foreign in a place, so not knowing your way around and all. And that's, fine sometimes, but sometimes you don't want to. So it's like knowing these things so you can actually make the right choices for yourself. And it's really funny, but when you talk to people, like most people are not choosing for themselves. They're choosing for other things. And it's really, it's really interesting. Like, I don't know, like if you've always wanted a family, for instance, right? It might be one thing to keep a job because it has good health insurance, you make enough money for your family and your kids. That's making a trade-off, right? It's something you've always wanted, and like you're trading, your time for that, whatever. But like, you have to know these things to make these choices.
Hmm. Yeah. So going back to Henry Ford talking
Oh, you
about
found it?
money. Yeah, I did. Uh, so it was really interesting because he says, if money is your hope for independence, you will never have it. The only real security that a person will have in this world is a reserve of knowledge, experience, and ability.
Because
How
you can
interesting is
always do
that?
something.
He was one of the wealthiest people of his time. And he's like, if you're searching for money for security, you're never going to have it. It's just not there
Well,
because you could
it
have
also
money and you could
traps
lose
you.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it becomes a trap because you have to keep it at that same level or you lose it, or you can lose it with absolutely nothing on your part being a failure. This, society can have problems,
Bank
economy
could
can have problems.
collapse.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff
Someone
can
could
happen.
steal it, anything.
Yeah, yeah. And you never know. So it's like that's never going to give you that security. But people have this false idea that it will. And I mean, to some extent, I get it. Like if you don't have enough money to meet your basic needs, it feels like money will solve all your problems. It really does, because I've been there before too. Like, you feel like money will solve everything. But then once you start to really look at it and you get enough to satisfy, you realize it can't satisfy everything. It just
Yeah.
won't.
I find it really interesting to like listen on people's conception of how much money would be like. I hear people all the time be like, "Yeah, if I just had like 1 million, like that would just, just like why don't they just give me I mean, it's just $1 million. I mean, whatever." And
Yeah.
it's like I feel like still, even with inflation and everything, 1 million is just this number that people think, "Oh, you have 1 million, you're set." But it's
Yeah.
like you look at all these lotto winners who win $1 million, and
Oh,
three
they're
years later
bankrupt.
they're broke. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, it's crazy, dude. Yeah, most of them go bankrupt very quickly and like, but think about it, like, well, it used to be the case like back like, 50 years ago. If you had 1 million, you could live off the interest on that when the banks actually paid interest,
Hmm.
which they don't anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, but like nowadays, it's like
Yeah,
that's
that's
not, I mean, it's a
25,000 a
lot.
year in
Yeah,
interest
it's still a
if
lot of
you're
money.
making good interest on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you invested it appropriately or something, it's still a lot of money, but like, again, you never know what's going to happen with it. And if you don't have any other skills or anything, you can't ever make it again. That's the other funny thing, right? It's like,
True.
we need our ability to like actually recoup that if something happens.
Yeah. So back to the importance of being yourself.
I would say, I mean, I've always loved the existentialists, and I think they always like on this issue, authenticity is like crucial for them. And I think it's just like, how do we get there and know ourselves? And I think one good thing to do is reflect on what obligations you perceive you have and like reflect on the reasons why you're doing things. Like really honestly, it's helpful to journal this. It's very hard at first because we always self-justify things. But like sit down and ask yourself, like, it could be anything. Why did I really pick this career? Why am I doing this or that? Why do I feel like I need to go to this place, this party or whatever? Like, and ask yourself, like, is it because I want to, or is it because I feel an obligation to, or is it because social norms or pressures? And just do that slowly and see how much of your choices are influenced by external things besides yourself. That's a
Hmm.
good starting place.
Yeah. There was another thing that I was reading this week. It was talking about logotherapy, which comes from Man's Search for Meaning, or yeah, no, was that the name? I think the Viktor Frankl book. I think Man's Search for Meaning.
Man search for meaning, I think. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he started this whole psychology movement called logotherapy. And it basically, the premise of it is like people, when they're having psychological crises, they're really just searching for meaning in their life. And it talked about how the first question, anytime he had a client, the first question he would ask them was, "So why don't you just commit suicide?"
Good question.
Right? Crazy. And
Wait,
it's kind of interesting because it got me thinking. I was like, yeah, I mean, if there's got to be something holding you to this life.
well, Camus said that. He said answering the question of suicide is answering the most fundamental philosophical question, namely life's value, right? So if you don't want to kill yourself, why? What value is there to living? I mean, that's the most fundamental thing. What's keeping you here? What's so important that you want to stay? I mean, really, it is a good
Yeah.
way to kind of get to the core heart of it, right?
Dude, and when I was reading it, I was thinking back to like the times when I was depressed in life. And it was primarily because I almost felt like I didn't have meaning in my life. I was doing stuff, particularly things that society said that I should do, but
But
it
that
was
you didn't
not
want, so
meaningful
there's
to
no
me.
meaning.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
not meaningful to me.
Well, I mean, an existential crisis is a crisis of meaning, you know? I mean, we are meaning makers. We need to understand our world and ourselves. And unfortunately, most often we do that by looking outside of ourselves and taking meaning from others rather than creating ourselves, right? So I think you're right. I think like, the biggest issue is how do we understand what things mean to us and ourselves and our place in the world? It has to come from us. We have to generate that meaning. And it's, you have to start by recognizing that you're not, that you're living another life basically.
Hmm.
I always like to think of it in terms of like my life and other lives because it helps me see like, am I living my own life or am I living somebody else's idea of a life, of a good life or
Mm.
something?
Hmm.
That's a good way to kind of phrase it in my head.
That is a good one. Yeah. And it's something where like I there's almost like an unfolding of it. And sometimes it disappears and then sometimes it comes back. But it's like I think that at times in life I've gotten stuck because I was like, oh, I don't have it all figured out. And usually those are like the worst times when it's like, oh, I don't have everything figured out. I messed this up, all that stuff. But it's like it kind
Yeah.
of unfolds. And usually the times when it feels the worst, like I've messed up the biggest and there's no purpose whatsoever. That's like right before things change for the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've kind of hit that point, right? Where now you can start like putting things back together. It's
Hmm.
fine. I think sometimes like, what is it? Kierkegaard says, you know, he says in, I think it's in either or, he says, what I need to get clear about is not what I must do, but what I must know. Like what for me is going to be a truth that I'm willing to live or die for, which is like that question of like, why would you not kill yourself, right? What's the most important thing or most valuable thing to me? And Nietzsche talks about when he talks about creating ourselves, he talks about organizing ourselves around like a principal drive or idea or something like that, right? But in both cases, you get this idea of like, if you have something, if you know what really matters to you, all the other stuff is like just extraneous stuff. It will kind of, it'll brush off and it's not a big deal because you're focused on that one really important thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we talked about it on here, but did you ever hear about those stories about the people who went to commit suicide? Like they went to go jump off a bridge or a building and they ended up surviving.
No, I don't think we talked about that one here.
Oh, dude, it's freaking nuts because almost every single one, or I'm pretty sure it was every single one, when they jumped, they realized like all of a sudden it hit them that everything in their life is changeable. Like they can literally fix everything in their life except for what they just did.
Yeah,
Dude,
yeah.
it's so crazy. Because like you just
Well,
get
it's
trapped in the when yeah.
Well, I think that's what happens. We get trapped, and you see people that have like really difficult situations, like, say somebody who like destroys his life with drugs or alcohol, or like tries to commit suicide or something, or has a terminal illness. Like, you see them after the fact. A lot of times they change a lot in their lives because they do like that's a realization that one, well, things are as bad as they can basically get, right? And now you can rebuild how you want. So it's kind of it's like a position to be in where you can kind of just start over essentially. But most people they don't have to have, they don't have that experience. So it's like, but realizing again, like you said, like everything can be changed, retransfigured, can be thought of differently. I mean, that's the weird thing about being human is like, we create meaning, so we can make anything as meaningful as we want. We can change anything and we can change our lives. There's always time. Whether
Mm-hmm.
you're 10 or 60, you have time to change your life. And that's interesting. I mean, it's funny. You ever see like I see stories all the time too of like older people who are like 80 who like they're, divorced or the other person they were living with died and now they're like living the life of their dreams. And it's like, it's like never too late because why not enjoy your time? You have
Mm-hmm.
this time. And if you're living your life, it's going to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I also think scares people of this though, on a side
Mm.
note, is it's that fear that, if I'm living my own life, I'm accountable and responsible for it because I made the choices. It's mine. If I listen to other people, if something goes wrong, it's like, well, it's their fault. They gave me bad information. And I do think that fear of failure or that fear of like not living up to expectation or whatever gets in the way a lot of us doing what we want because we'd rather be able to blame somebody than be the one that's really accountable and responsible.
Yeah, absolutely. And alongside that, the fear of loss. Like if you make it
Yeah.
somewhere, there's like, well, if I lose this, then I have to start over. And it's like, yeah,
Oh yeah, that's a
that
huge fear
sucks.
too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does suck, but like at the same time, it's like, I don't know. It's like it's also like regret too. Like if you think of we've talked about so many times like reflecting on your own death and keeping like your death in mind because it makes this time more important. But it's also like if you reflect on your own death, like what would you regret? That's also a good place to start for like what really matters to me. Would I regret that would I regret that I didn't work enough? Would I regret that I didn't spend enough time with my loved ones? Would I regret that I didn't do these things that I really wanted to do? What
Hmm.
are you really going to regret? And that's a great starting place too.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. At one time, I wrote down like a list of my biggest. Remember, we did the episode on the regrets of the
Yes.
dying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So, I
yeah,
mean, there were some good things like, I wish I would have done what was true to me instead of doing what was
yeah.
society. I wish I would have spent more time with people I love.
It's a
Yeah.
great way too to like, I mean, if you sit down and journal that a couple times, it's a good way too to just get clear about like what really is important in my life. Even to see like sometimes it's helpful too to see your relationships differently. Like, is this person really important to me? Am I spending too much? You know what I mean? Like to get clear on that too, because it's like we can't do everything, but we can do anything. And it's
Hmm.
hard to choose. That is the hard thing.
It is freaking hard. Yeah. I had a situation last week where I was just feeling like a turd. Like one day I was just feeling really bad. And
I
I was
hate
getting
that.
yeah, and I was getting down because I had to be around other people that day. And I was getting down on myself because I wasn't like, my normal sociable,
Upbeat,
like
like yeah.
upbeat
Yeah.
person. And then that's when I remember the Dr. Seuss quote, and I was just like, oh, hang on. I can feel how I'm gonna feel because if they care about it, they don't matter. And if they like me
Yeah.
for me, then it doesn't matter. So yeah.
Well, it takes the pressure off and it makes you realize that you can't change their perception of you. You're only in control of, how you act and respond. So can't
Mhm.
worry about it.
Yep.
Not worth it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I hate when dude, when I was sick, like what was that last week or whatever, and like I was so tired and I hate that. I just hate that. I get so mad at myself and like it took me like a solid 2 days to like relax and just like let myself just sleep
Hmm.
and not
Yeah.
be angry.
Yeah.
It's so stupid.
Yep.
What
I
are you
know
gonna
it's
do?
such a challenge being a person.
It is hard, We're aware, we're constantly reflecting back on ourselves, that camera lens, it's a pain in
Yeah.
the ass.
It's like that quote from Socrates, like I'd rather be a human dissatisfied than a pig satisfied.
That's from Mill. Yeah, yeah,
Oh
yeah,
no. Yeah, I was always like, no way, because if you're a pig, you don't suffer. Like who the hell
yeah,
cares? Yeah.
yeah, it's true.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a funny quote too, because like dissatisfaction is our way of realizing how to change the world for the better or our lives for the better. But you got to be dissatisfied about the right things, right? About things that matter to you, and
Mhm.
not let, again, you're getting back to the authenticity and being yourself. It's like that's where I think a lot of us fail. We let other people's dissatisfaction cause us to change,
So
rather than the
crazy.
other way around. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So anything else you want to touch on?
Just be yourself.
Yeah. Bingo. Easier said than
Yeah,
done, but it might as well just
yeah.
start now.
Only get one shot. Might as well make it your own.
Bingo. So there you have it in a nutshell, how to be yourself, the importance of being yourself, not how to, maybe a little how to. But, anyways, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure to like, share, subscribe. Also, give us a review only if you enjoyed the episode. If you didn't enjoy it, we don't want to hear about it. And definitely
Nope.
don't post it on Apple Podcasts. But this is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Randy.